My father blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that she calls me daddy, he regrets everything. I'm a 24-year-old male and the older brother to my 5-year-old sister. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to her as Belle for some background. My parents had me as teenagers. They were 15 and 16 at the time, and even as a kid I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their families. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me, while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide, and even then they couldn't afford a home. They lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9, and my father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite the fact our living situation was better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me and I still had the audacity to behave like this. And even when I never misbehaved, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had 2 birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with a bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, nothing that I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. But as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line, when my parents realized, I gave up on them. As throughout my teen years, they, mainly my mother, began to treat me better. But at that point, I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents, and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them. In fact, I began to feel neutral towards them. In my eyes, we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum, and never had any real conversations with me and never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant, and I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but instead it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications, she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. Not only did he begin to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death. She was barely a mother to me, so there wasn't much to be sad over, but he also blamed his daughter for unaliving his wife. He was never home after the incident, and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes, to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full-time and called out my father multiple times, but he always got angry and ended the convo with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiley and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older, she began to try and spend time with him. I guess as she began to follow him around the house. Of course, that quickly ended after he blew up on her and she began to fear him. I realized she saw me as a parental figure despite the fact she knew I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. My father blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that she calls me daddy, he regrets everything. Part 2. I then told her if she wanted she could call me dad, and since then she's been calling me daddy. My father ended up getting a girlfriend and began to change himself as he stopped drinking, got a better job, and even began to take over a majority of the bills other than the portion I agreed to pay to stay living here. He never really tried being a father to Belle. He did begin to eat breakfast with us, but that breakfast was spent in silence other than me and Belle talking. Fast forward to a few months ago on Belle's birthday. I had planned a party for her and invited her to preschool class. My father ended up attending as I guess his girlfriend thought it would be a good time to meet his daughter, as she was the one who looked excited to be here. Anyways, while she was opening gifts, I surprised her with one of those kids' electric cars. She screamed and hugged me, yelling how she loved me and called me Daddy. After the party and after the bell was fast asleep, my father asked me what the hell happened. I was confused till he yelled, asking why his daughter was calling me Daddy. I asked him if he seriously didn't know why, and told him that I was the one who raised her. I bought her everything. I celebrated her first. I was the one who didn't abandon her. He was quiet and went to bed. Since then, he's tried to play father and talk to her, but he was a stranger to her. She was a sweet girl, so she entertained my father's conversation, but he could tell how awkward she felt, and it was clear it hurt him. Despite how selfish it is, I don't want their relationship to get better. After all, just as she saw me as her dad, I saw her as my daughter. I graduated college, and I'm looking for a better job so I can move Belle and I into our own home. I may be a bad person for enjoying my father's misery and regret realizing he ruined his chances in having a relationship with his daughter. But I'll never be as bad as him. You may like when your kid gets to that age and you no longer have any privacy, and regret realizing he ruined his chances in having a relationship with his daughter. But I'll never be as bad as him. You may like when your kid gets to that age and you no longer have any privacy. As a surgeon, what is the scariest thing you've seen in the operating room? A 30-year-old man came to see me for unexplained visual loss in one eye. I thought there was a mass pushing against his left optic nerve and ordered an MRI. This demonstrated that the mass was in fact a large aneurysm of his carotid artery against the brain. The protocol was to send such cases to the vascular neurosurgeon who saw him the same day. He agreed on the diagnosis and ordered an angiogram to better show the aneurysm. Both the angiogram and surgery were set for the next morning. This was about 1987, and there was no way of fixing the aneurysm without open neurosurgery. We were lucky as Dr. T was world famous for his technical ability, and he was kind to allow me to come as his assistant. The skull was opened by the resident by drilling 4 holes that were then connected with an electric saw that had a ridge to protect the soft brain beneath. The large skull flap was removed, and the underlying dura, tough skin around the brain, cut and flapped back, exposing the brain. For the next hour, the chief resident pushed and manipulated the brain to one side, and then a ridge of bone had to be drilled down for better exposure. Then we had a clear view, the juncture of the carotid and ophthalmic arteries with a big bulging arterial aneurysm coming straight up at us. Before touching this, Dr. T placed 2 cords around the carotids on both sides, just in case, he explained. Then, a silver aneurysm clip was slipped in behind the aneurysm and slowly released, allowing the 2 prongs to cinch closed over the neck of the aneurysm. Only I didn't get to see the last part. Suddenly the entire brain pan filled with blood. I was suctioning but couldn't keep up with the outpouring of blood. The resident ripped his suction tip off, and I followed suit, so we went with these hoses into the bloody opening, but we couldn't make any headway or even see the brain. Dr. T couldn't see a thing, and blood was spilling up and over the edges of the skull. A nurse started to read the falling blood pressures, 110/65, 90/50, 70/40, 55/0. Then the anesthesiologist said, "We've lost him." Blood pressure crashed to unmeasurable. The nurse was squeezing bags of blood into him, but couldn't keep up with what was pouring out. Now, if this happens in the abdomen, you can press the bleeder or place clamps, but in the brain, you don't have those options. But cool as a cucumber, Dr. T stuck his hands below the surface of the blood and began feeling about. He tied off the carotids proximal to the bleed. Then suddenly our suction worked, and the blood pressure came up from 0. Dr. T examined the area and laughed. "There was a second aneurysm hiding behind the first one," he exclaimed. A second silver clip was placed. Then the carotid ligatures were removed. I turned to the anesthesiologist and said, "Were you scared?" "No," he said. "Just sad." He was dead, and I saw no hope that we could get him back. Such a young man. 2 hours later, I related the story to the patient's wife. On follow-up, the patient did great. He even got his vision back. I have never seen such cold-blooded rapid action under fire. Dr. T didn't even take a second to swear. Afterwards, in the doctor's lounge, he smiled and said, "It's more fun when it goes like that." As a teacher, what's the darkest thing you've heard a student say? He was 15 and more streetwise than I ever could imagine. He was always hyper-vigilant about his surroundings. He was brought to our area by a dedicated group that was trying to help young boys caught up in their neighborhood gangs. This boy had been on the street more than he had been in school, but he was so bright he could learn easily if he wanted. He didn't trust anyone, particularly me, an older female teacher that had no idea about the life he lived. Over time, though, we established a bond. He felt a little more at ease in my class, and we would chat after school as he waited for his ride home. One day he confided that his girlfriend was pregnant, but he would be unable to be there for the birth because there was a contract out on him in his old neighborhood. He also said that he'd never see the age of 18, so why try in school? That gave me chills. I was incredulous. He was only 15, how could that be? What could possibly have caused that? Was it bravado? He went on to say, "I'm not going to tell you the things I've done because you'd have to report them." I explained that just what he had confided I'd have to share as a mandated reporter, and he said he figured that. No problem. He also said that he was going to run away from the group home when the time was right and go to Texas where he had relatives. The leaders of the home were aware, and they tried to monitor his schedule very carefully. Soon after he found his opening and ran, he evidently made it to Texas. I was relieved that he was in a new environment, and I hoped that his future would be a positive one. Unfortunately, he was drawn to return to his home neighborhood when his girlfriend gave birth. His best friend suggested a walk around the block to take a break from the hospital atmosphere. A car pulled up, shots were fired, and he lay dead on the sidewalk. The friend, nowhere to be found. There was one brief paragraph in the paper about his death, and it was dismissive. It made me angry. He was only 15. I think about him often. I wonder about his girlfriend and their child. Will the cycle continue, or have they found a safer life? She cheated on me, so I had a trio with her former ex-boyfriend and the guy she cheated on me with. To clear up any confusion that might come up, you have to know that I am a bisexual man. I love sharing this story because I'm still proud of it. A few years ago, my ex-girlfriend cheated on me with another guy. She then had the audacity to tell me that if I was a grown-up, that I could deal with it, and that she hopes we can still be friends, but she lost any feelings for me and is fully in love with this new guy now. If she hadn't said that, I probably wouldn't have made this plan. But now I had to teach her a valuable lesson. I was in a depressed state for a long time and couldn't bring myself to delete her number, and she thought I was her friend now. She started to send me pictures of her and her new boyfriend with laughing emojis. She didn't even care about how much she had hurt me. And then one day, while I went through Tinder, I found someone who was quite familiar. Her new boyfriend. Of course, I wouldn't tell her that her new boyfriend is on Tinder. In fact, I matched with him, which was quite surprising, because I thought he was straight, and we started a conversation. He didn't know who I was. She never told him she was in a relationship while she was flirting with him, but this was perfect. We had longer conversations, and he told me more and more about him. Over the weeks, we learned more and more about each other, and now I had a plan. I suggested that we could meet each other at a bar. He agreed. Keep in mind, he was still in a relationship with my ex-girlfriend at that time. When we met, we had a great time, and one date became many dates. It took me a few months, but then I got him to the point where he developed feelings for me, and I was his affair. What he didn't know is that I got in contact with my girlfriend's former ex-boyfriend as well. He broke up with her because he came out as gay. I was in contact with both guys. The ex-boyfriend and I got along very well. In fact, I made him a close friend of mine. In our conversations with my new boyfriend, we talked about sensual desires, and he told that he always wanted to have a trio, so I suggested one with the gay ex-boyfriend. I knew that he was his type because we kind of look alike, and he had feelings for me, so I asked the gay ex-boyfriend if he wanted to become the third one, and to my surprise, he said yes. I'm honestly still surprised how all of that worked out without her noticing, but it did. And then the day came where I decided to go nuclear. The two guys came to my apartment, and I lead them to the bedroom, and they started talking to each other. While they talked, I took a selfie from a safe distance, close enough so that she could see their faces but far enough that they wouldn't notice. Then the action started. Of course, I won't go into any detail, but damn, I enjoyed it more than anything in the world. A few days after this, I told him that now that I granted him the wish of a trio, I wanted something in return. I told him that I don't want to be in an affair any longer, and told him that he should either break up with her or I will break up with him. I knew it was hardcore manipulative, but I had a plan, and I had full control over him. He actually broke up with her and threw her out. I even got him to move out of his apartment to move in with me, meaning that she lost both her home and her boyfriend. But I wasn't done yet, because after that she texted me with crying emojis that her boyfriend dumped her and that she regrets leaving me. I then said, "Your boyfriend? Are you talking about this guy?" And I sent her the selfie I took. She called and texted me several times, but I ignored her. My plan was almost successful. There were only 3 things left that I still had to do. The first was that I told her mother, who hates infidelity more than anything because her father cheated on her mother with another woman. Her mother was angry, but thanked me for telling her. From what I've heard, is that her mother cut ties with her. But I admit that I don't know if that actually happened, and I don't think that it happened, but it would be funny if it was true. The second thing I did was dumping him, because unfortunately for him, he was a cheater too, and I hate infidelity. The last thing I did was going out with the gay ex-boyfriend, and after a few dates we got together, and we are still a couple. In the end, I destroyed both her and the guy she cheated on me with and couldn't be more proud of myself.